The leader has muted your line. To unmute your line, press #6.
Continue today from where we left off. The first two sessions that we had together really covered the basics, what you need to know to leverage ClientBase, certainly to start getting the benefit out of it. But it was focused primarily on the nitty-gritty, or the basics. What do you need to do to get started? Today I want to share with you some of my favorite things that you can do to get a little more advanced. A lot of what I'm going to be focusing on is going to revolve around res cards, some of the more advanced things you can do when managing your clients' trips and invoicing. And then toward the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about querying or searching your database to really help you build your business. I'm going to share with you some of my favorite searches that you can run. I'm also going to share with you a document that we've prepared on the TRAMS website that you can use to come up with even more ideas on how you can use all of this information you're gathering. We're going to start, and I'm going to start by building a completely new res card for one of my clients, because I want to go through from the beginning. We touched on the basics when it comes to pricing and so on, and I've even talked a little bit about itemized pricing, but I really want to get a little more in depth on that. So I'm going to go ahead and go in here to Nelda's profile. And let's go ahead and create a new trip for her. So I'm going to click on res card at the top. And I fill out the top fields as they're appropriate. Okay. And I'm not that creative, so I'm going to go ahead and do another Caribbean cruise. Okay. And we'll go ahead and put in the travelers. And I touched on this before, but let's talk about it one more time. So as I'm adding my clients, my travelers, in Nelda's profile, I only have one traveler listed. All I've entered was Nelda's name. So when that happens, I have a couple of options. First of all, you can see there, I don't even have Nelda's full middle name. Remember, when you're working in a res card, you can always click on the Modify button. And that's going to bring up the same traveler profile that would if you were in the directly in the client's profile. So this is where things like Nelda's middle name can be stored, her birth date, her passport. We already talked about all of the information you can track and why you might want to. But I just wanted to point out that I can go in and add that information right from the res card. Okay. Fill in what I know, because quite often you may not have this information when you first get started on the trip, but you certainly learn it as you're making the reservation. And I could add more people to her profile from here. If I click on Add, I can add to both the res card and the profile. I can also add just to this particular res card. And something I didn't talk about when it comes to adding to a res card is when you bring that up and choose res card only, I can still go in and look to see if that traveler is already in my database, right? So if I put in enough to find Rachel Green, I can have Rachel Green go ahead and tag along with her on this trip. It's not going to create a permanent record for Rachel Green. Rather, it's going to link her just for this trip. If I don't have anybody in my database, I'll be able to add just their name, some basic information. So since I didn't talk about that. But again, if you know for sure that the person who's going is part of your database and you want to add them to Nelda's profile over here, I can go ahead and do that. Okay. And we'll go ahead and add Ryan to this trip. We'll call him a friend. Okay, so now we have Nelda and Ryan both going on this trip. I just wanted to point that out a little bit more in real life, how that comes to play. When I go to add the reservation, and I touched on this very briefly, especially when we talked about Live Connect, but I want to talk a little bit more about itemized pricing. So I can go ahead and do Celebrity Cruises, and we talked about Live Connect, and when you have the new server in a few weeks, you'll most likely want to Live Connect if you're going to be working with a vendor that supports it. But even if you're not really working in the going to do a Live Connect, you can still put in a lot of rich information about this trip. Go ahead and remember, not everything's required, but the things that we do have about the reservation, I want to make sure to fill in, including that confirmation number. Okay. And we talked about why the quantities are important. So for example, duration on a cruise or number of rooms, number of nights, and so on. And the main reason that's important is when it comes to the pricing. So when we talked over the last couple of weeks, we talked about how ClientBase takes the base plus the tax to add them together. And that gives me my client's total. And by default, base plus tax equals my client's total, $2,750. If you look over on the far right-hand side, you'll see that tells me what the client's total is. And we also touched on how you can itemize the price, or you can use the per unit pricing. So with the cruise, I can either choose to charge per cabin, where ClientBase would take this and multiply by the number of cabins, or I can do per person, where ClientBase takes the totals, multiplies it by the number of travelers, and that gets doubled. And that's really cool if you have two people on a cruise who happen to be paying the exact same amount. But especially when you have a cruise, different people might be paying different amounts for their cabin, especially if you have 3 people on the cruise, right? Passengers 1 and 2 pay a different amount from the third person. Or maybe one of the people is eligible for a discount and the other isn't. And you want to be able to communicate that to the client on their invoice. That's where itemized pricing comes into play. So if instead of charging per person and having the amounts here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with 0. Okay. I'm going to click on the itemize button up here. It's just a little bit to the right above the pricing. And this is where I can go in and build as detailed pricing as I'd like to. And I also have some control about how that detailed pricing is going to show up here in the reservation. Each line gets added together to give me the total amount, but ClientBase will let me sort it either by travel category, by traveler, or even by description. So if I'm booking a cruise, I might want to go in here and say the cruise portion for Nelda. And I can even go in here. Now I have some descriptions set up like base fare, for example. You could also type in the amount here if you were inclined. And then when it comes to the pricing, not only can you add things together, you can also subtract them. So let's say for Nelda, her base fare, we'll stick with $2,500, and her taxes are $250. And my commission, right, if I type in an amount, ClientBase is going to calculate that commission based on the base. I can go ahead and include that. And now I'm going to click Insert. And so now we know for Nelda, her fare, the base fare is $2,750. You can see down here ClientBase lists it. And then it also shows the total down below. And now if I want to go ahead and put in Ryan's fare as well, notice here I didn't click anything. I did not click New. Rather, since it's going to be the same, all I do is change the name. I'm going to keep everything there, and I'm going to insert that. So far into the same point I was when I said charge per person. But now I can go in and add some more things. For example, maybe Ryan gets a discount of some sort. So I can click New, and the discount's coming off the cruise. I'm going to go ahead and put in the traveler. And for this, I have one called Awesome Person Credit, so I'm going to stick with that. But this time, instead of putting a positive number, I'm going to go ahead and make this negative. I'm going to go ahead and say negative, and then we'll say you get a $100 credit or discount. There's no tax on that. But that's going to pull the same commission, or let's say 14% of that. So now when I put in the same way I would put in a positive amount, but now it's going to subtract $100 from Ryan's fare. It's also going to adjust the commission. It's going to take 14% of the commission away, or $14, 14% of that. And notice how ClientBase has calculated that into the total. So a lot of users will use this to build the different components. In this case, like we have that discount. If I want to add an add-on, or what some agents like to do is when they go to cruise, you might go ahead and say for Nelda. And this one I could even put in, I could call it NCCF. Some people like to break out the NCCFs because there's no tax on it, there's no commission on it. And we'll add $125 for Nelda for her NCCF. We'll go ahead and add for Ryan. And then if I want to include, I could even include things like, for example, if I had an air add-on, I could put in the total for their air. I can put in the different categories. If we had a hotel pre-stay or post-stay, I could go ahead and put that in here. So entering the pricing is just like I do on the first screen, but I'm able to get a lot more advanced about this by adding per person. For example, transfers is a common one that comes up. So as I go through and add all of these items, again, it's separated out. ClientBase is still giving me a grand total. And then also I have the options. So when I enter all of this detailed pricing, or if I've live connected and those details have come through, I can still control how this shows up on my client's invoices. Up at the top, you see it says, in this case, summarized by category and traveler. So if I set it up that way, what ClientBase is going to do is it's going to take the category and the traveler, and it's going to give me a subtotal for each one. So everything that says hotel is going to be broken out, and everything that says cruise is going to be broken out into one amount. Or I can choose to summarize it by description and traveler. So instead of looking at the travel category, it's going to show me that description. So show the total of everything that says pre-stay and the total of everything that says NCCF, the total of everything that has awesome person credit, and so on. Now sometimes you don't, even though you have that level of detail, sometimes when, especially with Live Connect, there's too much information and you just don't even want that to show up on the invoice. Well, instead of changing around all of that imported commission, or I'm sorry, imported fare information, I can go ahead and say, no, I don't want to print that itemization. And what that tells ClientBase then is to treat this as though I had put in the amounts directly. It's not going to break it down. It's just going to take the total base and the total tax and give my total fare. And the last option, which is actually the first one listed, is one that generally I do not recommend using, and that's to print all of the itemization details. That creates a very long, very complicated invoice. So I'm going to go into another reservation in a moment. I'm going to show you what this means. But I wanted to show you here how you can go ahead and you can build your own detailed pricing to whatever works best for you. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and you can see here, so the pricing shows up. Now it's grayed out, and this is another thing about ClientBase, right? Whenever the information is grayed out, it means that there's something behind it that's going to further adjust what, there's something deeper. So you can't change it on this screen because, like in this case, I can't change the amount without telling how it's itemized. So I'm going to minimize this for a minute. Let's go into one of my res cards that does have an imported reservation with a whole lot of detailed pricing because I imported a reservation from Avanti. I don't know if any of you book with Avanti, but they have a really nice Live Connect. Let's take a look at this. Okay, and you can see here I have the reservation for Avanti destinations. If I double click on Avanti, you can see it's a nice short trip. There's not much going on. And I'm kidding, of course, because as you can see, there are actually quite a lot of components to this. Instead of typing them in myself, ClientBase pulled that information directly from Avanti. But the other thing ClientBase did is it pulled over some itemized pricing from Avanti. So if we look at the itemization here, ClientBase pulled it over. Now it itemized it, but it still put it under one traveler with just that tour package. Okay. Let's go ahead here and we'll put in the package. We'll say $31,0450, $350 in taxes, and $412 in commission. Because I want to break this down, so I'm going to go ahead and break that down. Okay. But I want to go in. I'm also going to add in some more details. Let's say that the air is broken out for as well. Okay. Oops. Okay. And let's take a look at how this itemized pricing is going to carry over now. So I have the air broken down, and I have the tour package broken down for my client. And right now I told ClientBase summarize it by category and traveler. The category being tour here, being air here. Okay. So if we take a look at how that's going to print out on my client's invoices and trip proposals, you can see here all of the beautiful information that came over from Live Connect. But do you see how when it comes to the amount, Now it's broken it down, it's broken it down per traveler that I put pricing in for, and it's broken down by that hard-coded category, so air or tour. Gives me the total per person, and then gives me that grand total for everybody. We go in and look at some of the other itemized pricing options. If I change this to summarize by traveler, that's just going to give me a total for each traveler, right? So it would give me the grand total broken down by the traveler, but just the total. If I choose description, it's going to pull in, but instead of using the hard-coded category, it's going to use whatever description I put in. But what I want you to see here, and frankly I want you to see why I don't like it, is if I choose to do all itemization details. We take a look at it. As you can see, it can get pretty, well, pretty detailed. And in this case, even though we only put in, right, a couple of itemizations, but if you have a lot of itemization broken out, that can get kind of convoluted. It can be good, too, though, if you're planning a pretty extensive trip and you do want to break down the pricing, it is nice to have that option. But generally, I don't recommend choosing the option to print all itemization details. Don't forget, and I heard some people join in, if you want to ask any questions, you should be able to press pound 6 to unmute yourself. Or if you want to use the chat feature, go ahead and type questions to me as we go through, and I'll unmute everybody as well at one point to answer questions. But that's itemized pricing. It certainly is a more advanced feature in that you can really have a lot of fun with how you break down the pricing. Certainly can be very helpful when it comes to being able to communicate to the traveler how exactly you got to this total. But now what I want to talk about are some of the things that come into play when it comes time to generate the invoice for your client. And we've talked about the basics, right? To generate a new invoice, you click on the invoice button at the top. And one of the things I did not touch on before, but I do want to draw your attention to now, is the insurance prompting. And what you may notice is that when you go to generate an invoice, ClientBase will sometimes prompt you. It will remind you that there are no insurance reservations on this trip. And then ClientBase is looking in 3 places to see if this client's trip is insured. Okay. So before I click on that, let me point out the 3 places it looks. The first place it looks is it looks inside the reservation to see if you have a reservation with a third-party insurance company like Travel Guard or CSA or Travel Insured. And if there is a reservation with the category type of insurance, ClientBase will move on because it's insured. It doesn't have anything else to say. If there's no reservation with a category insurance, next thing it does is it looks inside the individual reservation to see if any of the service providers show that there's insurance booked. So you can see here I have several flights and transportation and so on, but none of them have insurance listed, would have the travel category insurance. If any of the reservations have a service provider with the category insurance, ClientBase takes that to mean that the trip is insured. It won't prompt you. The third place it looks, and this is why it's important to understand itemized pricing, is even if there's no reservation for insurance and there is no service provider for insurance, if anything is itemized with the category of insurance, ClientBase is going to take that to mean that there's insurance on the trip and it won't prompt you. So if there's any indication that this trip is insured, when I click to generate the invoice, I will not get that prompt. But like in this case where I do have a lot of information but no insurance, ClientBase is prompting me, and it gives me 2 options when this happens. One is to accept insurance, the other is to decline it. If you click decline insurance, ClientBase is going to let you generate the invoice just like we've talked about, but it is going to ensure that there's a disclaimer printed on the invoice. So no matter what you do, if there's no insurance on this, ClientBase will make sure that there's an insurance disclaimer printed. On the other hand, the accept option is actually a really cool shortcut. If I click accept, ClientBase takes me to create a new reservation, and it puts in my preferred insurer. And I use CSA mostly because I can get into their website to a point to demonstrate it, but this would be your preferred insurer. And now when I go to create a new reservation, It brings up my Live Connect. I can go through kind of quickly. And when you're insuring a trip, what's really nice too is all of the existing reservations show up. You can highlight the parts that are going to be insured. Notice ClientBase has put in the trip cost in this case. It's also put in the departure date and the return date and the deposit date and the final payment due date. Pulled all of this from the res card. So when I click Connect and go to get an insurance quote, ClientBase is going to have that information to pass on to the insurance company, so I can really quickly and really easily get a quote. Now, CSA's changed their site a little bit, so I can't get as far as I used to, but you can see here that it's filled in most of that information, the departure date, the return date, the total trip, the traveler's ages because their birth dates are on file, their residence because of their address. And as I go through, this is where it sometimes stops me because I don't have a login. But when I go through, I can get a quote. So even if my client's not quite ready to book, ClientBase makes it really easy to quote that insurance, so I can communicate to my client easily, this is how much it would cost you to insure that trip. Okay. Every insurance company is a little bit different, but it's the same process. If you decline the insurance, you can then use Live Connect to quickly get a quote, because not only does ClientBase pass on the traveler information like it does for the other Live Connects, but it also lets me easily send over the details about the trip, the pricing and the due dates and so on. So the insurance prompt isn't just a nagging, it is also a shortcut to help you get that quote. Now I'm not going to book anything because I can't, but I wanted to show you what happens when you click accept. If I decline it, it takes me to the same screen. This is also immediately where I would be taken if there was already insurance on here. A couple of things on the screen that we didn't talk about before but are important to know are under branch remarks. And by default, your agency has several remarks set up to just print. You can see here mine starts with many suppliers, charge penalties. But if I click on the remarks button underneath that box, it actually brings up a larger screen with what we call canned remarks. And you can see some of them are already selected because the agency has some remarks pre-selected for me. One is the cancellation penalty reminder, and one is the thank you note. One remark that you have set up at Ships and Trips, which is really important, is the CCRC remarks for California residents. And those remarks only apply if your client lives in California. Well, by default, that's going to be listed here and it's going to be checked. If your client's not in California, you would simply highlight that CCRC remark and just uncheck it. You see when I uncheck it, it just takes it away like it was never there. I've talked to Jim, and there might be some tweak to that where you don't have to unselect it going forward. But for right now or for any other canned remark, you can just go in and unselect it if you don't want it to print. If you accidentally unselected it, you can just check the box again and get it. You can see here we also have some other remarks here that we may want to include. So instead of typing them, I can just check that box, and those remarks that have already been set up are filled in. You can also add more remarks here. Anything you type in here is going to apply just for this invoice. It won't be automatically included on any future invoices for this trip, but you can choose to include some more notes. Maybe you want to be more specific about when payments are due. We talked about the due date on the when you're generating the invoice, where ClientBase will at the bottom put the balance due and a due date. But if you want to put in a payment schedule or something like that, this is a great place to do that. It's going to put right on your client's invoice. So again, a couple of important things here. One is, for now, if your client's not in California, be sure to unselect the remarks pertaining to CCRC. And also, if you want to add any remarks, or if you just want to type in some free flow remarks, this is where you do it. It's a lot easier to type into that box than scrolling through up here. Another thing that comes up quite a lot is what happens if my clients are going to split their payment and they're going to pay with more than one credit card, or maybe they're going to pay part with check and part with cash. But I think maybe more often is you have a client who's paying with 2 different credit cards. Well, when you're doing that, you can split that payment. So right now my tour is highlighted, okay, and I can put in the amount they're paying. We'll say that they're paying their deposit of $25.79.84. And by default, if I put in a payment up here, ClientBase is going to say, cool, that's how that $25.79.84 was paid. But if I click on the booking payment button, a little bit to the right, this is where I could go to split my client's payment into different payment methods. So if I want to go in here and say, sure, he's paying with a credit card, and if I put his credit card number on file, I can select it. But we're not going to put the total, even though they paid a total of $2,579.84 today. Let's say that they put $12.50 on that Visa. So I'm going to go ahead here, credit card with $12.50 and insert it. And then now I can add more payments. So I can go in here and say, it could be cash, it could be check, or just a different credit card. Okay. Trying to split out how that card would have been charged, and I knew I did it wrong. Let's make that $12.79. Okay, I'm off. $25.79.25. $29. Okay. Last offer. I think I did that right. No. Math is not my strong point this late on a Monday. $13.29.84 is what I was supposed to say. Right. So if I want to communicate to ClientBase that, sure, we paid a total of $25.79.84, but it was broken down onto 2 credit cards, I can do that. Or if it was partially on credit card and partially with a check, whatever the scenario might be. So now that I've done that, I've split out that payment. Notice that the amounts are now grayed out, right, because there's more information. So if I need to change the amount of the invoice, I'm going to need to click on the booking payment to clear it up there first. So let's take a look at what this invoice looks like. Again, nobody's typing to me, so if you have any questions, use chat, please. Here's my invoice. If I go down to the bottom, you can see here, notice that the invoice still says the client paid $25.79.84, but it shows how it's broken down. Visa starting in 4/1 was charged $12.50, and the Visa starting with 4/4, and it was charged $13.29. So you don't have to generate more than one invoice. You simply have to click on that booking payment. That can also be used even if you're not splitting the booking on the same booking onto credit cards, but maybe you have 2 reservations. You have the tour that was paid on the Visa and the insurance was paid on a MasterCard. You can split it out there as well. So let's go ahead and generate this invoice. Okay, it's saved. Go ahead and close that out. Okay, and so now we have the total. It's invoiced. If I go to reprint that invoice, it remembers that payment. And also for this invoice only, see, there's my more remarks just for this invoice. Hope you can see where I'm pointing. This is an example. This is the disclaimer that I put on the invoice for my insurance prompt. Since we don't have insurance, I added those lines there. Yours is going to be a little bit different, but that's the insurance disclaimer, and make sure that that's printed. Now, another thing that comes up, especially if you have a client who makes several smaller payments toward their trip, eventually you might get to the point where they owe more than their base. And let me show that to you. Okay. Oops, I didn't need to do that. I want to go and do an invoice. I'm still going to decline the insurance. And I'm going to go in here. This time I'm going to make it a little bit easier on myself. So I'm going to say the client paid the whole thing on the same credit card. Okay, let's say they paid $1,200. It's not quite their full amount. Nope, that's not what I meant to say. I meant to say $12,000. Okay. Okay, so it's still not quite the full amount that they owe. And we're going to go ahead and generate that invoice, though. So that could have been 12 $100 invoices. Okay. So you can see here, so the balance due is $929.16. ClientBase does indicate that to my client still. Okay. But what happens when that's here is if we look at this, if I go to generate a last invoice now, let's say the client's going to come in and pay their remaining $929.16. Well, I've come into a situation here. Is normally when I generate, ClientBase only tracks the taxes when your client's paid the full amount of base, and that doesn't usually pose a problem because quite often clients, if they're going to be paying, are going to be paying at least a portion of their base and then paying in full with the taxes. But in this case, the client owes $944. Let's say they're going to pay an even $500. Well, if you notice, the base is only $29.16. The rest of their balance due has to come out of the taxes. And this is where things get a little bit tricky, because if I go in here and say the client's paying $500, ClientBase says you can't invoice more than the client owes. Doesn't come up often, but that's why it's happening, because right now, even though the client's paying $500, when it comes to the base, there's only $29.16 left. So what you need to do here is you need to put the rest as coming out of the taxes. So if they're paying an even, I can't remember what I said at this point, their total due is $929.16, they're paying $900. So I actually need to figure out what that is, and this is why I thank goodness for calculators, because again, I can't do math on Monday night, so minus $29.16, right? So they're actually paying $470.84 of their taxes as well. Okay. And so that came to an even $500. So I can still show that the client paid $500. This is what they'll see on their invoice. But from an accounting perspective, I know that their base fare is now paid off, and then that the rest are just going to be their taxes. So if we look at that invoice, oops, put in a form of payment, and then look at their invoice. Okay. You can see as far as the clients is concerned, they still only paid $500, and they still owe $429.16. But because the taxes are separated from the base and client base, I need to clarify for TRAMS and client base that in this case, yes, they're paying part of their taxes. Doesn't come up often, but if you don't know why, it can be a little surprising to get that message that you can't invoice it, and that's why it happens. When I go to make the final payment, that remaining $429.16, I say generate that invoice. Notice that the invoice amount actually shows that the base is 0. The only remaining amount is that $429.16. It's all coming out of tax. That's one that often brings up some questions. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody to see if anybody has any questions about that.
The user has unmuted your line.
Go ahead and press *6. But does anybody have any questions about
the screen before this one?
Sorry?
The screen before this one, it showed $944 reservation total for commission, and then $944 not invoiced, and then $944 due after you made your $500 payment. And then the next screen, it actually switched, and now it shows zeros in the last two columns.
Yeah, I think we invoiced on the previous invoice. I don't know why it says not yet invoiced. That's a good question. We can check that. That's actually a really good question, why it zeroed that out because yes invoiced. So you point out a very good thing. I might have to follow up. Thank you for pointing that out. I'm going to have to double check what happened there. Like I said, this doesn't come up very often where you're not invoicing where you have to change these. Yeah, and it's a display issue. That actually was invoiced previously, because if you leave the base paid in full, which we did, that commission's going to stay there as though it's invoiced. So I don't know why it, oh, I'm sorry, I'm being kind of dumb here. Yeah, not yet invoiced. So there's nothing that's not yet invoiced. The commission was on the previous invoice.
But it was before you made the $500 payment, or right after you made the $500 payment.
Right, because the client's base was still paid in full.
It was $29.16
at
the top. It was $29.16, and then it was, I forgot what the taxes. I don't remember that number that was there.
The taxes were originally $900. And then there's 429.16 left. So that's the only balance due are from the taxes. The commission was invoiced previously. The client's total fare was invoiced previously, or base fare. So the only thing left to invoice with this final payment are going to be the taxes.
I wonder if anybody else saw that, because I'm not getting it. I said, I wonder if anyone else saw that.
Anybody else saw that?
Yes,
actually, no, you know what? No, this is right. I was being kind of absent-minded. See, the commission 944 was invoiced when we did paid the base in full, so there's no commission due. Here, let me.
Oh, it wasn't. It said 944 across the board.
Let me void that invoice then. Let's take a look. Okay. So the total amount, this is the total when we started the reservation. These are the amounts that the client still owes. Now, we've already invoiced the base completely, so there's no more base that's due. Out of the $900 in taxes, up to this point, the client still owes $429.16 in taxes. And
but you're a screen too far. You're one screen too far. You have to go back behind this screen to see what I'm talking about.
Okay.
It was when the 2916 was at the top, and they were going to make a $500 payment, and you were showing us where to put the difference.
I'm afraid I'm not following what you're asking me at this point.
There was a $500 payment you were going to make. The 2916 was at the top of that box.
Yeah.
And you said, what happens when the base fare is not as much as the payment? That's the screen.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so I think you're asking me to go back to the previous invoice, so let's void that invoice. So now I'm back before we ran into that, so we have this. So the client, as of this point, the amount they still owed for their base was $29.16.
Yeah, you see the 944 all the way across the board in the commission thing. And when you make that $500 payment, I don't think that 944 moves.
Right, so I said that the client's remaining balance was $470.84 was the amount.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I also invoiced the commission. So the commission was included on this invoice because the client's base fare was paid. So the commission came through. So after this, the only amount the client's going to owe is that remaining $429.16 in taxes.
So are you saying you zeroed out that 944 yourself? You put a zero in there?
I did not zero it out. When I ran this invoice, I left it there, and that's why it wasn't on the next one. It's already been invoiced. It was on this invoice. Right? So you see here, I'm generating this invoice. I'm saying the client's paying the remaining $29.16 in their base fare.
Yeah.
They're paying $470.84 out of taxes, which is how we got to an even $500 amount.
Okay.
And I'm also invoicing that commission. Okay. So I've gone through, I've taken care of that. Once again, I forgot to put in a form of payment, though.
So even though that commission is more than a $500 payment, you're going to zero that out.
Right, because remember, the client's already paid, before that, they paid $12,000 or $14,000.
Okay.
Okay, now that they paid their base in full, client base says, okay, let's track the commission on it.
Okay, I got it now.
Okay. Okay. And I'm sorry, I wasn't sure which invoice you were talking about, so it took me a minute to go to the right step, but I hope that made sense. Does that make sense to everybody, or if not, I mean, speak up, that's fine here.
No, I got it.
Kind of comes down to, generally, when you get to the final payment, you're not going to be in that situation where the client only owes taxes, so it's a little bit more behind the scenes that when the commission comes out. It's just when you have to invoice for just the taxes that things can get a little, you have to do some manual math.
Okay.
Any other questions about invoicing, or Jim, anything that you want me to bring up that I haven't touched on? That you know off the top was something you wanted me to bring up?
I think you covered what we took.
Okay,
What
I was
we
going to say, I made notes from your email, so I think I touched on everything. Okay.
Yeah, that was good. That was great.
Okay. So that again, and then you know we touched on these a little bit during the previous lesson when we talked about invoicing. The reason I didn't want to get too in depth because again, these are things that may not come up very often, but when they do, it's certainly nice to know how to handle it, how to handle those multiple payments, how to handle when you're have to invoice more than the base that's due, but less than total. So it can be handled. You just have to kind of look at the screen and unfortunately sometimes pull out a calculator.
I have one other thing to throw in the mix here. Maybe it's a whole other series of webinars, but I know you're deep into groups. I think you did a document about 100 pages of PDF about how to handle
which I'm
groups.
in the process of revising, but yes.
So I just wonder if you have any. One of the features I really use a lot because I'm not, I don't know, Live Connect's great, but a lot of times I don't even bother with it. When I get one invoice created, I just copy and paste, and that saves me so much time.
Sure.
I don't know if maybe it's worth reviewing that a little bit.
Yeah, you want to talk about copying and pasting? Absolutely. Copying and pasting can be a really good time saver, especially like Jim said, if you're doing a group, or possibly even if you're, you know, maybe you have an extended family, you know, they book 2 cabins, but, you know, the reservations are almost the same, but they're separate reservations. You can save time by copying either a reservation. So see here, this Avanti destination, let's say that they actually booked 2 Avanti destination trips. They're similar, but they had to book them as 2 reservations, maybe because they couldn't have more than 2 people in a room or something like that. Well, kind of like with Windows, you know, you can copy text and paste text around. ClientBase has the same thing. So if I want to make a copy of this Avanti destinations reservation, I highlight it, and you see on the right-hand side this button that says copy. Well, if I click that, kind of like in Windows, it doesn't look like much happened. The only thing is the copy button went away, and now I can click paste. And if I click paste right here on the same res card, it's going to copy over almost everything about this Avanti destination. In fact, you'll see the only thing that did not carry over are the travelers. I'd still have to go back in and say, now this one is for Jane and Henry, and maybe possibly update their confirmation number because they probably don't have the same confirmation number. But everything copied over. So like Jim said, especially if you're not live connecting to import that second reservation, by copying it and pasting it and just filling in the little bits that changed, see now I have both reservation 20 and 29. Not only can you copy within the actual res card, right, but if I copy this reservation here, and now I go back to the trip I started working on for Nelda, right? So let's say Nelda's actually going on that Avanti trip with Hank. So I copied it from one res card. Notice when I come back to Nelda's res card, in addition to adding a reservation, I can also paste it. And if I click paste, ClientBase has copied over the entire the Avanti trip, except for I'm going to go in and I'm going to say, no, then this time it's Nelda and Ryan who are going. Their confirmation number is different. And I could change anything else that's not exactly the same. But instead of having to create it from scratch, so if you build one really nice reservation for one of the people going on that group, by copying the reservation, you can see that it fills in. Oops. I could cancel here. It copies over a ton of information for you and saves you a lot of data entry. So if you take the time to do a particularly nice job on the first reservation, you can then copy it and paste it across res cards so that you don't have to recreate the wheel. That's copying the reservation. I'm in the res card, and I have a specific reservation. on the right-hand side where I click copy and paste. So if I copy it, it's going to take this reservation and put it in the clipboard, so I could go then paste it into another res card or even here. It's just like Windows. ClientBase keeps remembering which reservation you copied. So every time you click paste, it's always going to paste whatever reservation you copied last. So if I click paste, it creates a new reservation for me with all of those details. So that's one way you can do that, is that you can copy and paste right into the res card. Okay. So I can do that. Now you can take it up a level. So if I want to copy this entire res card, I'm going to add in a group name just as an example here. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that. I'm still in Nelda's res card at this point. But instead of just copying one reservation, let's go back to Nelda's profile. By the way, do you see here, if you don't close out the window, rather you minimize it, what's nice about that is the open windows go to your Windows menu. So I can go down here and I can switch between Hank and Nelda because both of those windows are open. Okay. So here I am in Nelda's profile, and when I go to her res cards to see her list of res cards, you'll see for the entire res card there's also a copy button. So you see on the right-hand side next to the res card, I can click copy. I'm going to do that. And now if I go into somebody else's profile, I'm just going to, we'll go to Charlie here, for example. And I go over to the res cards tab. Now, I'm not going to click on res card up at the top. I don't want to create a new blank one. Rather, here from the res cards tab, on the right-hand side, I can click paste. And you can see ClientBase copied that entire res card from Nelda's profile. Now, when you copy the entire res card, you have to add the travelers here to the res card itself. Let's say that both Charlie and Lucy are going. And then I also want to go into the Avanti destination itself, update the confirmation number, specify which travelers are going on this reservation. But again, what's nice about that is it carries over the group name as well. So it helps make sure that the group name's filled in if this is part of a group. Jim, thank you for mentioning that. I totally forgot to mention copying and pasting reservations, and it's a pretty cool feature. In fact, that's much more interesting than what I was going to talk about next.
Tom?
Yes.
Are you still hearing me?
I can hear you, yep.
What I like to do personally, I mean, this works really well for me, is when I start out with a group, the first thing I like to do is make sure I get the profile into the group, like to use a level 3 filter, get my group all together, and then I can just, when I'm working on the group, I can toggle back and forth between the different reservations, and that's when it's easy to just fly through the copy and paste, because a lot of times they're all the same category of cabin, let's say on a cruise.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe have a few little differences, but a lot of the reservations are almost carbon copies.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, absolutely. That's definitely where I find copy and paste is most useful when you have groups. And again, not necessarily even block group space, but like a group of people, you know, booking 3 cabins on a cruise or something, to copy and paste them, definitely. I will take a moment to do a shout out for Sabre Cruises, though, because once Sabre Cruises is working on your network, you can import those group individual reservations. So you do have that option where you don't have to copy and paste. But for those vendors that don't live connect, or if you, like, you know, Jim, you said you just choose not to live connect, then the copy and paste is the next best thing. Okay, any other questions or ideas of things that I didn't think to mention? Jim? No. Okay. Well, the last thing I wanted to touch on, and we're kind of getting close to the end of the time, but that's okay, because really what I want to show you is how to use one of my favorite documents on our website. You know, I keep coming back here. one of the things I want to point out to everybody on this call is, and you may recall from our first meeting, right, if you click on the ClientBase link in the middle of trams.com, and again, that's our website, trams.com. You click on the ClientBase link. My mouse would agree and just click instead of, there we go. Under the documentation, so skip to, and then documentation. You can see here we have all sorts of resources. The product resource guide is the one that I forwarded to Jim, which I think he forwarded it to you. But if you click next, lots of things here. And one that I really like is this creative saved queries. And Jim touched on this, why queries are so important. As you put in information into ClientBase, and you're putting a lot of information into ClientBase as you work, ClientBase makes it easy to use that to find clients, to find your best clients. Like right now off the bat, could you name your 10 best clients? Who are your biggest bookers, the 10 people? You probably have an idea, but with ClientBase you can have the hard numbers. You can find your top clients. You can look for people who spent over a particular dollar amount. I know some agents, when toward the end of the year, they'll look for their top 10, 50, 100 clients and make a point of sending them a special holiday card, or maybe even making a phone call to them. Well, you can do that quite easily in ClientBase. And this document shows you some of our favorite queries. As a team, those of us in training and the support reps, we went through and we talked about what sort of searches do we find to be particularly helpful. And on this document, we talk about some searches you can run to help you maintain your database. For example, you can look for profiles with no email address, or maybe that have an invalid email address due to a typographical error. You can look for profiles that have no marketing codes, because remember, Ensemble uses marketing codes extensively. Again, you can use look for profiles that have no res cards, so maybe that's a fertile ground for you to go to if you can look up all of your clients who you put into the database, but they have no res cards. Or maybe clients who've been in your database, but they have not booked anything in the past 2 years. All of these are listed here with instructions. So what I'd like to do is just give you an example of what the instructions look like and how you would apply that in your client base. So I'm going to look at this top, in this case, XXX clients based on past purchases. So we're going to go down to page 6, and I'm going to show you this one as an example of how you can use this document. Okay, so there it is, top number of clients based on past purchases. And so what this is going to do is it's first of all going to tell you what kind of search it is. Because in ClientBase we have 3, we call them levels of queries or searches. Level 1, the one that's most familiar to you, that's where we spend most of our time. But that, when we talk about the different levels that we're talking about, these tabs, each one of these lets you get more advanced in how you search your database. And the one that we're going to do is a level 2 query. Okay. And now it tells me, so when I go to query, I'm going to look at the general info, and I'm going to say look for my profile type that is leisure. So I want to look for leisure clients. So what that means is that here in the level 2, I'm in my level 2 search. I'm going to click on the filter button on the right-hand side. And it said on the general, I want to make sure that I'm choosing profile type as leisure. Okay. Also, since you have, you could narrow it down by your primary agent, your name. Okay. Now it also says that the profile status is active, and by default, that's all ClientBase is going to look at. So you don't really have to change anything there. Now as I go back, and then it says I want to go to the travel history tab and narrow it down to my top number of clients by sales. Okay. So it tells me that this is on the travel history tab. There's the travel history tab. And you can narrow it down by specific vendors. You want to find your top 10 Royal Caribbean cruisers. I could put in Royal Caribbean. But I could also say here, I want my top 10 or top 100. Right down here in the bottom right. Okay. And there you go, in a click, there are my 10 best clients. It was just that fast. So when you're looking at this document, the first section here tells you which tab to be on, and then it tells you specifically when you're looking in that on those what tab you're specifically going to and what you'll put in. And remember, this is just a starting point. All of these are a starting point. So as you play with your these different searches, keep in mind, well, what else might you want to do? What else would be helpful? You can narrow it down further. You can play with these, but these are some suggestions on some searches that we think are particularly helpful. Okay. We do have a lesson that goes more in depth on running reports and queries and reports in ClientBase, but I wanted to touch on this because we've been talking a lot about putting information in, and certainly I hope you agree that having it in ClientBase just helps you day to day as a travel agent. But I wanted to give you an idea is the more you do day to day to help you get your day to day work done, the more ClientBase can do to help you build on that business. If you want to run a report, ClientBase prompts you when they don't have insurance on the res card, but maybe you want to take a look and just review all of those res cards that don't have insurance. You can do that. Another one that is really cool, and Ensemble has some information about this on their agent portal, are ways that you can query your ClientBase data to see which of your clients are receiving Ensemble promotions. And what I like are, because every time a client clicks through on one of the emails that they receive, you actually get an activity, and this will talk about how you can find the people who are clicking through on your promotions. Because if people are taking the time to click on the emails and actually look at the details, it's a pretty good indicator that they're interested in traveling. So it's a great way to know which clients it might be worth taking some time to talk to. So and again, for time, I can't go too much in depth, but I want you to know about this document. Jim, I'm going to forward it to you. I hope you don't mind forwarding it on. I make you do all the legwork, but I want you to have this. I want you to take a look at it. If you want some help running the queries yourself, please feel, our daily Q&A sessions, our support desk, and there is a video recording specifically on how to do the queries more in depth. Okay, any questions? I know I've covered quite a lot, so I don't want to. Nobody? I know you're out there. You can stay quiet, but I know you're there. No. Well, if nobody has any questions, I certainly. Oh, hold on. Oh, okay. Somebody pointed out what I was just going to say. It's a lot of information to get in 55 minutes or 65 minutes. I know. So, if you can't think of your questions now, of course, the Q&As, the support desk are there. Certainly, if you pass them on. Jim, you can certainly pass on questions to me. We can certainly talk about, especially if you notice a pattern in the questions. But just remember, we're all here to help you, whether it's the people at Ships and Trips, or more important, or when it comes to Trams and ClientBase, the people at Trams, the support desk, and the Q&As. We're here to answer your questions. Don't be afraid to go into ClientBase and just use it. You can't break it. I've tried, so. Don't be afraid of it. Well, we don't say we're trying to break it. We call it beta testing. But yeah, that's what it comes down to. Try to break it and see what happens.
I think it's great. You pointed out resources. I think that a lot of people were not even aware are out there. Mm-hmm. And I think it's great. You pointed out the power of CB and Trams. I mean, we just. Probably most of us just scratch the surface of what it can do, and
that's common.
We can take it as far as we want in terms of learning. We just have to go out there and look at the resources that are there.
Yeah.
The 3 sessions that you've done, really appreciate that. It's a good foundation. We're going to make sure we get it on our site very soon. So.
Yep, and I should have the recording for this to you within a couple of days, Jim. It takes some processing on my end.
Sure.
And I just want to point out, I've still only touched on, there's still so much more ClientBase can do. that's the thing. There's always more ClientBase can do. It's a matter of starting with the basics and building from that, because ClientBase can only help you as much as you put in there. As you can see, I'm not doing anything extra as far as putting information in. I'm letting ClientBase help me do my job to track that trip and generate the invoice. But by doing that, I'm gathering all of this extra information and these extra tools I can use to proactively market and build my business as well.
All right, Tom. Well, I certainly appreciate everything you've shown us. I think that most people that have joined the webinars probably feel that way as well. So,
well, I hope so.
I get the recording so everybody else, when they want a refresher, can go in and just review it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we record it, because, like Dora, you mentioned, it's a lot of information to get. So once it settles in, if you want to go back and remind yourself what I said during one of the sessions, you'll have that on the website. Jim will have that for you. Yeah, absolutely. And again, like Jim mentioned too, please remember that when it comes to getting help, we have a lot of resources, whether it's our live classes, our recorded trainings, our daily Q&As, our support desk. We want to help you use ClientBase to its full potential, because the more you use ClientBase, the better you realize it is, and then the more you want to use ClientBase, and that's kind of what we do. So we're here to help you. Don't forget that. Please use the resources we have out there. If you don't, we get bored. Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for those of you who made it here every week for the past 3 weeks. I appreciate you taking part of your Monday out for me. For those of you who've been here for just today or a couple of them still, I'm glad you were here, and we're going to have the videos for the lessons that you missed. So again, I just really appreciate it. It's always a pleasure working with you. You're a great group, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.